the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. A couple of procedural things for you first-timers to know. If you've got a cell phone, please turn it off or down. Thank you very much. Does everybody have hearing enhancers who needs them? We have hearing aids if you need them. Is that?
Oh, not again.
In the car, we didn't walk out the car.
Sharon.
Hi, my name is Sharon. I have been bringing Dylan, your youngest member, for quite a few months now. And I finally remembered what better group to ask than you guys. I run a golf tournament in honor of Major General Frank H. Smoker Jr. It's called the Foxhole Invitational, and it benefits the Pennsylvania National Guard Military Museum. Don't know if you guys have ever been out there, but I sit on the board out there, and I understand, it gets pretty good raves for anybody who's ever been out there. But anyway, we raise money to keep that museum going, honor our veterans, preserve their history, and teach our kids. So anyway, we are always still looking for golfers and sponsors, but I also come to you guys tonight for $10 a flag. We set up a memorial flag garden at the golf tournament, at the first tee and the putting contest, where you can purchase a flag. If you're interested, you can either fill the form out tonight or take it with you and mail it in with the information. And we set up as many flags as we get $10 bills for. And we have a chaplain that comes out and he says a prayer and he talks about veterans and everything. And then he sends our guys off to play golf in memory of all of our veterans. So anyway, I have information out on the table. If anybody wants to ask any questions afterwards, or if you want to pick up a form and send it in, but we'd appreciate your support, and if you can, help us out.
Thanks, Sharon. Do you need to have a foursome, or can individuals come and play and be...
Foursome.
Need a foursome. So put a foursome together and get on out there. Anybody else have anything they want to say before I go on again? What Rich mentioned earlier about all the past speakers, we're going to try to get that up on our website so that any blanks that we have, if anybody has a postcard from a blank, please let us know. Future speakers, we're booked out through about February with a good list, a bunch of people. So next month is John Gross, who was a bomber pilot, and he flew 35 missions in several different airplanes because the ones he had kept on getting broken up. So he's a neat guy. We had lunch with him a week or so ago, and he'll be very interesting. Okay, now. Big reminder, don't forget, for those of you who don't know, as you know, we don't charge for this, but we do have a helmet committee very diligently at the door on the way out. Please pay your respects to them. August, a little timeline here. A couple of things happened in Europe. The Allies broke out of Normandy as a result of Operation Cobra. It was kind of a disaster at first. General Bradley, the commander of the First Army, knew that General Patton's Third Army was assembling and waiting for the word to move forward in Normandy. So on the 25th of July, he had the German front lines heavily bombarded. And they had some 1,500 planes drop 6,000 tons of bombs. And they beat the hell out of them. They greatly disrupted them, but there was a price to pay because, bombers, they say they can put the bomb down the smokestack. Well, that's not exactly right. And what they can do sometimes is put them on your own limbs. And we lost about 150 Americans who were the recipients of these bombs. The going for them was really rough because they had 3 infantry divisions and an armor division moving forward, and due to the craters and the heavy bombardment, the 4th Armored Division had trouble negotiating. At least several of the tanks fell into the holes. So it took them a while to get straightened out. But after they did, they met up with Patton and headed east. And as you know, August saw tremendous fighting in Europe, mostly in France. The US, British, Canadian, and Polish forces were successful after many attacks and counterattacks, encircling the Germans in what they call the Falaise pocket, the town of Falaise in north-central France, and captured 4,000 Germans there. The Germans had retreated east across the Oise River, and they left 18,000 troops behind, who were simply captured. So it took the Allies another 9 months, but they were on the road to victory. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, if you remember last month we talked about in 1944, the Marines invading Tinian, and they took it over. It took them a while, but in July of 1945, the first atomic bomb for combat use was assembled on Tinian, and as you know, on August 6th, they were dropped in Hiroshima, it was dropped in Hiroshima, and on August 9th, in Nagasaki. On August 14th, Japan surrendered. The number of people killed in those attacks range anywhere from 100,000 instantly to well over 200,000 instantly and subsequent damage. But it's been said that otherwise it might have been much larger losses to the Japanese and the US had they not dropped the bombs. It's been a long discussed controversy, but those who were there probably were right when they said that. One more thing here. Oh, you probably read in the paper recently, Theodore Van Kirk, the last surviving member of the crew that dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, died Monday the 26th of July of natural causes. And he's been buried up in Northumberland, Pennsylvania, so there's a local contact. But he flew nearly 60 bombing missions, but it was that one mission that really hastened the end of the war. You can read about it. I'm not going to read all this to you, but it's very interesting, his career. One of the things that they did when they dropped the bomb, by the way, they're only 15 seconds behind schedule. Perfect good timing there. As the 9,000-pound bomb, nicknamed Little Boy, fell toward the sleeping city, he and his crewmates hoped to escape with their lives. They didn't know whether the bomb would actually work, and if it did, whether shockwaves would rip their plane to shreds. They counted 1,001, 1,002, 1,003. Reaching 43 seconds, and they figured it would take for detonation, and they heard nothing. So they concluded it was a dud. Van Kirk recalled it seemed a lot longer than 43 seconds, and then came a bright flash, then a shockwave, then another shockwave. And he said it rocked them pretty badly, but as you know, the mission was a success. Okay, tonight we have a local man, Tom Yingst. And there he is sitting right there. I'll give you a little bit about him. You'll hear his World War II service took him from Hershey to assignments in Texas, California, New Mexico, and eventually to the combat zone in the Pacific, on Guam and Saipan, working with the 317th Bomb Squadron. He served as B-29 Super Fortresses and continued preparing the huge bombers for the return flights to USA after VJ Day. His post-war career includes working at Hershey Chocolate while earning his degree in Hershey Junior College, followed by 20 years with RCA developing early television technology and working at Harris Electronics in Quincy, Illinois. He eventually returned to the Hershey area and taught electronics at the Harrisburg campus of Temple University. And one of his students is sitting here right beside him, another World War II veteran. So welcome to both of you. So with that, Tom, it's yours.
I can stand right there. Stand up there. Okay. Okay. You know, before I started, he was talking about the atomic bombs and everything. I had the opportunity when our son was stationed in Okinawa, and we stopped and bombed Tinian and Saipan, and I actually had a car rented in Tinian, and I found the Enola Gay, where the Enola Gay got his bomb loaded, or, you know, Tibbetts was the pilot of that airplane. He came from Quincy, Illinois, and I worked there. Anyway, And it was sort of interesting hearing him talking about that. Little background. I'm the oldest, when I went to the service, I was the oldest of 11 kids. And we actually got started back in Fishing Creek Valley when I was a year old. And we lived in the Morris Eastman farm back there. And a good friend of mine that I go to had breakfast with is his great uncle. But anyway, we lived there for a while. Then we moved down along the Swati, or toward the Swati on Gravel Hill Road, and got started there. But anyway, some of these pictures that are shown up here, the one down the bottom there, I'm down the bottom, and that's when I went to flight school in Burbank, California, Lockheed Factory. And of course, this was when we started going motorhome all the time, and I used to go to the broadcast show in Las Vegas. And I'm going to leave that picture on there. Show that I was young one time. 1944. And the pictures that we showed there were ones that they had a little development lab for us on Guam and in Saipan, and we actually used that development lab. I kept those old pictures, made slides of them, then I finally converted them to CDs, and that's what the result is right here. But anyway, we were talking about some of the things that affect the background of the things that I've done. I must say this, that the Air Force was a fabulous background for me, as you will see. Anyway, we moved down along the Gravel Hill Road, and we lived near Pine Street down to the Swati, and lived there for a couple of years. Went to first and second grade there, and I met a guy by the name of Paul Masomer. And Paul Masomer was an electrician, and I decided at that point I wanted to be an electrician. And of course, that was some of the things that drove my need to go to vocational school in Hershey and graduate from the electric shop. Anyway, I went to first and second grade there, and I didn't realize that in the first and second grade there was a girl there that he was Ethel Eisenhower, and I didn't know that she was a student in my class in 1943. I found that out during one of the reunions that we had, and she was married to Pete Foley, who was the president of our class. Anyway, from there, if you go down to Pine Street, and you know, on the Pine Street, the right-hand side there, along the river, is where the Eagles came in, and I spent a lot of time recently, that is now, going out and looking at the Eagles there. And if you go back a little bit down the Gravel Hill Road, there's a little one-room schoolhouse, and that's the one-room schoolhouse we went to school in at that point. From there, we moved on the way to Hershey. And again, we lived along the Swati, and it's where the new bridge is that Lama Road's on. We had a house right there, and that's where I learned to trap muskrats and do a little gigging, which I understand now is illegal, but we did that. We did a little gigging for eels and everything. And to learn to trap, that taught me a little money. We used to buy little ice cream, and those of you who are from Hershey know Spagnoli's ice cream, and Spagnoli's ice cream used to come out there in the summertime, and we had got that ice cream. But anyway, we had Miss Seltzer as our teacher, and we lived there for quite a while. And then from there, we moved. Again, I was talking to get backward. Again, I want to go forward here a little bit. When we moved down to the Lamagro, I went to 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th Hershey School again by the bus system, and that's where I got the trapping and all that. But ahead then, we moved to Hummelstone, and we again lived along the Swati down by the dam down below Hummelstone, and I went to a one-room schoolhouse again in 8th grade. And there, I used my trapping money, and I bought clothes and stuff and learned to get ready to go to high school. And I rode the streetcar from Hummelstown to Hershey to high school in 9th grade. And I paid every bit of 10 cents a way to get from Hershey, or from Hummelstown to Hershey, and then return. Almost broke me to go to high school, so that is true. but we lived there, and then we moved to Shellsville in about 1940 on a farm that my dad was working arranging with Uncle Harry Yingst, and he was a cattle dealer up there, and he helped my dad get the farm started. But anyway, I spent 10th, 11th, and 12th grade there, had to walk across the fields over to the Loudonwick Road, and the Walmer boys would pick me up in their car, and I'd go to high school that way, and got started up. And then later on, my cousin Eva Yingst drove, and I had to walk across the field for about 3/4 of a mile that way, and the other way, and then we went to high school. Graduated from high school in 1943 into vocational school as an electric shop major, and then went to work in the Hershey Chocolate Factory because I was only 17 years old by 1 or 2 months at that point, and I had a deferment on the farm, and my dad didn't want to let me go to the Air Force. But in the meantime, a guy by the name of Bob Longman was in my high school class, and he was taking all these Air Force and special tests to get into the service. And I took those tests, and I got to the physicals, and then when it came to the color blindness test, if I leaned my head this way a little bit, like that, I could see a light blue and a light green number together. But the nurse caught me doing that, and she made me sit straight up and look at it. Look down there, I couldn't see a darn number at all. I missed the number, that was it. So anyway, I knew at that point I had bad color perception. But anyway, while I was working in the Hershey factory, I worked the 11 to 7 shift and came home and worked on the farm until about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, took a little nap, and then went back to work again. But Sundays we had off. But then, as I said, I signed up for the Air Force, and later as a volunteer to go to the Air Force, and took the physicals, and I remember taking the physical, and I knew it was color, I had bad color perception. It proved again that I had it, and that was it. So I couldn't fly as a pilot, co-pilot, or anything like that. But anyway, from there, I remember taking the physical, and I remember John Blackwood in my high school class. They could put both shots in your arm, and you go through that line, and he got those shots in your arm, and he passed out. But I looked at him going there, and I was a little worried about going through a shot and getting the shots myself. But anyway, I ended up in Shepherd Field, Texas, in basic training, and it was the same kind of basic training that you'd probably take in a lot of places, a lot of schools around the country. But anyway, one of the things they had us doing, which I didn't really tie anything to it, but we had to jump off of platforms. I learned how to roll, and let our shoulder head first roll around, and I would be able to roll and get up and run away. And I got pretty good at doing that. And we did a little traveling ride. We went over to the cowboy towns of nearby border Texas and all those places. And finished basic training, and then got transferred to B-17 Mechanic School in Amarillo, Texas, and took that course, and it was a fabulous course. We were working on B-17 engines, and we actually took the hoods and the cylinders on the outside, we'd take them off and fix rings and do all kinds of things that you had to do to be able to handle B-17. And during that period of time, we did a little touring around Amarillo, but not too much. But finished up at that school, and they had us on hold for a while, and I was able to assist a sergeant who was one of the teachers at the Amarillo school, and I was assistant. I think I learned more during that period of time than actually during the course when I was doing that. And then from there, after we finished at Amarillo, I was sent to Lockheed Aircraft Plant, which is in Burbank, California. It was a division of Lockheed on a runway. All our barracks and everything were on a runway on it. And actually there we took advanced airplane training, and one of the pictures that you saw there, you saw me sitting on a wing, and that was at that school. We finished that in sometime in 1945, and then we headed to Kingman, Arizona. And then I thought they'd tell us we were going to go to gunnery school, but basically what we did was go to a school which had guns and everything mounted on stands. And what we were learning to do was to handle mechanics of how those guns worked and make sure they're always free and they would work and everything else. So we spent time doing that. During that period of time, we drove out the country and we heard a little bit about a big storage area out there. We didn't know what it was. But to add a little bit to it, later in life, we got a motorhome, we started traveling, and I was able to take my life back to all these things I'm going to tell you about. And we went to this place again there in Hobbs, New Mexico. It turned out to be a food storage place for the area. You go down and be in a big cave, you go down inside the cave, and there was all kinds of demonstrations down there how they kept tons and tons of food there for the air. I believe it was mostly for the Air Force, but that was kept down there. Then from Hobbs, New Mexico, I got transferred to Kingman, Arizona. I said Kingman, Arizona to Hobbs, New Mexico. In Hobbs, New Mexico, that was an advanced mechanical shop that took care of B-17s that were really in bad shape, like all the engines had to be replaced, or something major had to be done to the landing gear. All major stuff was done there. So our job, as part of the crew, was to flight test these things. First, a ground test on the ground. We did a lot of checks on the ground with props and engines and made sure everything was running okay. And then we would take them for flight. And the longest flight we had, while we were checking, was about 4 hours. And what you do would you check all the electrical systems. You would check feathering of the props. You'd make the engines quit and feather and fly with 2 engines. We had it for one engine for a little while, but you lost a lot of altitude doing that kind of thing. But then the only thing we did to the guns at that point was a mechanical check to make sure they went up and down. And I like to tell the story, but later on, long time after I got out of the Army, I was able to take a ride in the B-17. And it was strange, how I couldn't get in the belly gun anymore. They made the B-17 belly gun smaller. And then I couldn't work my way through the walkway through the Bombay anymore. That got smaller. And then the V-shaped that got crowded. So I was just surprised that they did that. But anyway, we did a lot of flying. Almost every day we went up once or twice, checking out B-17s or major, a lot of them. There were a lot of things there. And then some of the very interesting things that happened. We had a co-pilot in our crew that did the flying when we were doing these testing. And we would go up and we had a book, of course, that we registered everything that we were doing. And we had to go through everything to get everything done, like I said, feathering the props, checking the electrical system, checking the guns, checking all that sort of thing. But he was sort of a nervous wreck. And the reason why, I found out later, the reason why he was a nervous wreck, he was shot down over, I believe it was over France. And the native people there saw him coming down, and they got a hold of him and took the parachute away from him and hit it right away, and the Germans never caught him. And what they did at nighttime, they had a brand new duck pond there, so they put him out in the duck pond, and he slept in the duck pond when the ducks out in the middle of the water in the pond. That's what he did for a while. And then finally, they were able to sneak him out, get him to England, and he got back, and that's how I got back to do this job that he was working with us on. And anyway, during one of the landings when he went down, if you're familiar with a B-17, of course a lot of airplanes I think of this way, you have a flap switch and then you have a landing gear switch. A landing gear switch usually has a knob, a flapper on it, so that you can't accidentally go up and hit it. You had to do something special to pull that flapper. Anyway, he pulled the flapper up, and somehow the interlocks got off of the landing gear, and the landing gear started going down slowly, and we just slid to a stop going down the runway, And it's funny how things work, and of course they call emergency. And those of us, like I was in the radio department during '90, and all of us got out of the back and we saw the pilot boat run down here, everybody up front going out, wings were going. But the airplane just went slowly down and stopped. That was it, nothing spectacular. Then one other time, we got through our flights and they told us about an airplane having trouble up there and couldn't get its landing gear down. It got one landing gear down, but the other was definitely jammed. If you're familiar with B-17, you'll open up the door and go into the bomb bay, and there's a crank in there that you can crank get the gear down. That crank wouldn't crank it either, so they couldn't get the landing gear. But anyway, that pal, a young guy, he was a real young guy, brought this airplane in on a single wheel, went by, we saw him go by, down the runway, and then he kept the engines going right, and then the wing just tipped a little bit like this, and it drug a little bit, and then turned a little bit, stopped. And he made a perfect landing for us. Anyway, we had lots of excitement there. Of course, we did do some gunnery checks. There was a place out in the desert there that had wooden platform, wooden boards that we could go out and shoot the guns out if we need to. Most of our tests, though, like I said, were mechanical tests. So, Hobbs was a fabulous experience with all the flying we got on B-17. Most of it was just still going through the checks and all that sort of thing. And we just had a great time. I enjoyed it very much. We were very busy. But then after Hobbs in Mexico, they decided that they were going to send us, I guess, get ready to go overseas. And we were set. We knew we were going somewhere, but we didn't know for sure where we were going to end up. But anyway, we finally ended up in Salt Lake City. And in Salt Lake City, there's an airport out there by Salt Lake City Flats. And we were in that airport. And at that time, they just kept us working on cargo planes. We were repairing cargo planes. And there were some B-25s there. And we saw this marker on the runway out there, and we asked the local guys what that was. And they said it was where the B-25s in 1941, or so before that, were practicing the takeoffs. And that they had to take off with that marker fully loaded. And of course, if you saw that one picture, or you saw the picture, the B-25s, well, I guess you see it in the movie, but the B-25s were loaded on the Hornet, getting ready to go over for the Doolittle raid. My friend of mine down in Dallas, Texas, was on that ship as a radio operator, and he was able to see it all going. As you know, later on, after the B-29s were caught, or the Hornet was caught out there with the B-25s on, they had to take off early, as you recall. The Hornet then, a couple months later, got sunk, and he had to swim for a while. They put him back in another aircraft, and he spent years and years on that after that was all over. But anyway, we spent quite a few times waiting for our turn to line up in the state of Washington to catch the convoy to go over to Guam. So we finally got to Washington. We had to wait in the barracks a while, and then the convoy got lined up. We got on our troop ship and headed for a couple-week trip to Guam first. And then during that trip, it was sort of quiet, but the ocean was a little bit rough. And we found out later that's when one of the big storms was up in Okinawa, so that part of the country was pretty rough in there. But I was able to go up I was up on the fifth deck of a cot up there, and I could hook my arm around the pole. I could go to sleep. At 18 years old, I'd just go to sleep and forget it. But a lot of the guys got seasick, and I pitied them. I never got seasick, but I did after I came home and fished with my father-in-law. Every darn time I go fishing down in the bay, I get seasick. But they caught me later. But then on the way over, there was a guy on one of the boats that hang on there, the lifeboat, and somehow he got it unhooked and he fell down in the water. But they didn't stop anything. All he did, he went on back, and we found out after we got there that one of the boats way back further picked him up, and he was okay. He made it. He made it in. Of course, then we landed in Guam, and we had to stay there because of that storm. Stay on the boat for a while. Then we headed in, and I ended up on the 55th Weather Reconnaissance Squadron. Before I go in there, I just reminded me of a friend of mine, Jim Swalmer, who was in my high school class in 1943, was a specialist in the Marines as a surveyor. So he came in after the Marines took Guam, and he was on a survey crew getting ready to survey, and there happened to be some of those Japanese and those 55-gallon drums, they called them, and they were down in there, and he popped his head up and shot him in the arm, and took a big hole out of his arm. And the medics had finally got him out, got him over. On the way out, another Japanese popped up and blew the boat up, and so they sank again, so they had to swim to shore, and then the medics got him and finally got him out of the area. But anyway, we spent a lot of time in Guam. Naganya was the capital of Guam, if you remember, and the capital of Guam was completely ruined because of the attack on, taking the Guam over. And all you could see were stone walls and stuff like that all over the place in Naganya. But our job then, in the 55th Weather Reconnaissance Squadron, was to take care and repair and get B-24s for this Weather Reconnaissance Squadron. So a couple times a day, the Weather Reconnaissance people, the group would come down, and we'd have everything ready. In other words, have the weather equipment in there, have the engines all tuned up, make sure there was no oil in the bottom cylinders and all that kind of stuff. And did a lot of testing and a lot of work on the B-24s, and that was a great experience. And people asked me one time, how similar was a B-24 to a B-17? All I can tell you is that we were sort of lucky to have a B-17 expert in a B-24 expert in our crew. We met there, and he stayed with us all the time. So we got the similarity between the 17 and the B-24 down pat. Engine change and all that stuff was pretty straight. Yeah, relatively straight. I wouldn't say straightforward, but they were alike in a way. So we spent a lot of time doing that. That was sort of interesting. In the meantime, I got a letter from my sister, and my sister told me there was a whole bunch of guys there from Hershey that were in Guam while I was there, but I didn't know it. It turns out I was down in Harmon Field, which is down near Guyana, and they were up in the north field, up in the north end of Guam. Chick Rice was one of them, if you ever heard of Chick Rice, but Chick Rice was one of them. And Harry Gardner was another one. Dick Smith was another one that was there. They were all over there, but I was there and didn't know it. But anyway, during that period of time, then, of course, this was now after the war was over, and then they sort of said, we're going to cut down a little bit the Weather Reconnaissance Squadron. They brought another group of people in to take over that. And they sent us up because of our experience, and they sent us up to Saipan. And our job in Saipan then was to simply take care of all the airplanes that they put in storage on the side where they had a runway where they had them lined up and stored there. Ones that they thought were way beyond repair. And so we had to do, so for example, one of the airplanes that were repaired required 4 new engines on it. It was sort of interesting in Saipan, the logistics of all of it. We were wondering how we were going to get around and how we were going to find all the parts we needed for these airplanes. Well, it turns out that there was a Jeep in the group, and we were driving one day, and I looked down the ravine, and the guy told me to look down there was a Jeep down there. So we got a truck back with a cable on it, we pulled the Jeep up and got it started around. That's what we drove then for the rest of the time we were there. And we were able now to go find parts. And you go into a stock area, and it'd be engines everywhere. You could find the engines you needed, what you needed for it. If you needed a generator, you could go find that generator. There wasn't a lot of help left anymore for that. For help you find it, so you had to go look through it for yourself. We did that. We spent quite a bit of time then repairing those things. And finally, they told us that we could repair a B-29 ourselves, and if we repaired it, we could fly it home. Because in our crew, there was a pilot, co-pilot, navigator, everything in the crew there, and they were helping on the airplane also. So we then got one. They gave us a B-29. It was a bummer. We had to put, I think it used 40 gallon of oil on a mission, and so, but they had 80 gallon tanks on them, as I recall. So a lot of oil available. So we put new engines on it. We put whole new generators on it. We put everything we could find on new. Now we test flighted it. The crew test flighted it, and off it went. And it flew good. At that time, now we're getting into 46, and we got in. Then what happened was the general that was running that whole area there, the maintenance area, was time to go home because he was over there. I think he was over there 18 months or something like that, and he was time to go home. Lieutenant Colonel took over, and Lieutenant Colonel liked our airplane a lot, and so he took it from us. And you know what to do with that? The idea was to use that airplane to communicate with the other islands, and he also used it to get his 4 hours a month so he got flight pay. And you're familiar with that flight pay thing. But anyway, that's what he did. They said, well, we'll give you more airplanes. So we started working with another airplane, and he gave us the option, Lieutenant Colonel gave us the option of going home in a troop ship. So finally we decided that we'd go home in a troop ship, but we had to stay there a few more months, and we continued to work on B-29s and getting them ready to fly home. So it was a great thing. And then what happened during that period of time, every once in a while you get some time off, and we drove around the island. We found the gun emplacements that were in caves and so forth, the big guns on the outside, the Japanese. We saw the dumps where they dumped all the excess material over. They even dumped jeeps and trucks that they thought were real bad over this cliff and down in there. And then also saw the suicide cliff, where the Japanese convinced the civilians that they had to jump off of that, remember that, and they jumped off of that cliff. And so, anyway, we found a lot of that. I'm telling you that because later on, my son, who was a picture up there, who spent 23 years in the Air Force, was a hospital administrator in Okinawa. We went over one year to see him for Christmas. And so we stopped in Guam, and I toured Guam, Tinian, Saipan, and then Tinian also. What worked, we were in Guam for a while. We did the touring there, and went up to North Field, and there wasn't much of North Field left anymore. But then we did a lot of traveling around there, and so we met some people that told us about the Japanese people who lived there. Actually went out in the jungle, and there were still some over there for like 10, 20 years or something like that. They made homes back there. But anyway. We then, the next thing that we did was they put us on a boat, and we finally went down to Guam, and we caught a boat on the way home. What I wanted to say about my Okinawa trip was the fact that we went there and we did the touring, and we saw all these spots, and I saw a diver on one side of this place where I thought the cliff was on the right side, and he was about, half a mile on the left side of this cliff. And I told him where to go, and a couple days later he found out that was where it was, and he did find jeeps down there and all that kind of stuff when he was diving down in that area. But anyway, we had great. Also, a friend of mine worked over in Tinian, and he got me an airplane ride over to Tinian from Saipan. I went over to Saipan, and I found where the Enola Gay's bomb got loaded. I found out where I thought the boxcar was loaded, and it was very interesting. They had they had to have big ditches and so forth, because the bombs were so big they couldn't get them under the airplane, so they had to drop them down in these bays and then pull them up into the bomb bay, and off they went. But anyway, that was an experience we had there. And the interesting part about this, almost all the roads had grass growing through the country, had grass growing, all the runways had grass growing through it at that point. So, but this became a tourist spot later, and they fixed everything up, and it turned out that they had it became a great tourist spot later on by the Japanese people. Then, actually, as I said, we went home. We got down to Guam, and we got on a boat headed back to San Francisco this time. And on the way back, it was sort of boring. So what we did, a lot of us, like a lot of the guys and GIs here did, is we played a lot of poker and a lot of blackjack and that side of the way. I won a couple $100 on the way home, and that was the beginning of selling my old 1931 Chevrolet and getting a new car, a newer car when I got home. But then, as we approached San Francisco, the rumor was going through the boat everywhere that if you had extra stuff that you weren't supposed to have, you might get a delay in getting out of the service. So we didn't take any chance. And I happened to have a whole box full of special tools that I loved. I could get into special places in airplanes and stuff like that. So I dumped my tools overboard. That was it, and I hated to do that. But we got to San Francisco, and they loaded us on a troop train on the way home. And those of you who are familiar with troop trains, they stop on the sides for a while and wait for more, do other things. And when they're waiting there, then the USO people would come up and they'd give you candy and popcorn and soft drinks and all that kind of stuff. That happened, I think, 3 places on the way home. And we got to Harrisburg, and everybody knew that we were from the area. So they came up, put a big party on for us. We had all kinds of soft drinks and everything in Harrisburg. We were in a signing, of course. And some of the guys got carried away, and they were over in another building when the train pulled out. So we went out, and a lot of the people weren't on the train. So they made us pull off of Lancaster and the signing there. And in that signing, then we had to wait there for a while. They brought them back. They brought them down there, got them on. We all got together, and we went down to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and got discharged there. I got home, and my parents had moved over to Carlisle at that point, but my sister met me in that 31 Chevrolet that I had while I was working at Hershey. And I saw the Chevrolet looked pretty good. But I looked at the mileage indicator on the darn thing, and it had many, many more miles than it could possibly get on it in the time that I was going. I never put that many miles on it. Well, it turns out, if you remember RS&T stickers during World War II, the ration stickers. So they had truck stickers, they had tractor stickers. The tractor had no fortunes, so they didn't use that much. So they used those stickers, and then they had the regular sticker. So those good girls were driving around all over the place in that car while I was gone. So I went over to the farm over in Gettysburg and then helped my dad wire some things in the barn. He had a more modern place now. The barn we had and everything in Shellsville, everything was done by hand. We cut the corn by hand, we shocked it, and then we husked it by hand and all that kind of thing. But over there, they started to have a little bit more modern things going on. And I helped him do that for a while, and then I told him I was going back, I was going to junior college under the GI Bill of Rights. So I went back to Hershey, stayed there for a couple months, and then what happened was C.J. Spiker, who was the manager, for those of you who knew anybody about Hershey at that point, he was the manager of the whole factory at that point. He called me in, And he said, it's time for you now, you're gonna go over to the electric shop and we're gonna make a factory electrician out of you. And I told him that I was gonna go to junior college. And he said, go to junior college and get it done. So that's what I did. And we went to junior college, Jonas Wallmer, Ernie Drescher and I, all from the electric shop, we went to junior college in Hershey. And from 1946 to 1948, and actually it was sort of interesting in a way. I had a little trouble getting to studying again. Those kids that were around me were whiz kids. Even though I loved mathematics and all that kind of thing when I was in high school, got good grades in it, but that was something new. I had to really apply myself to get going again. I worked night and day doing that. And the weekends, I worked at a gas station, Petros over near Grantville on the weekend and took care of that for them during the weekend. And then I finished that. We met up with a guy from American Television Institute of Technology in Chicago. And so we transferred then to American Institute of Technology in Chicago. It was down there near the pier. Well, it was 5050 North Broadway is where it started. And then we moved out there and went to school there, and I could take advanced tests. And I took the equivalent of 4 years. I took all that in a little over 2.5 years, got that finished, and got out of that school, American Television, with a degree in television engineering, and moved out of, and graduated, I think it was May of 1950. And then we took a job at a little technical school in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and was there about 3 months. And it turns out that my father-in-law met the principal of the school, Temple University Technical Institute in Harrisburg, and he wanted to see me. So I went home one weekend, and I took the job right on the spot as an instructor then for Temple University. And right here is one of my students from back at that point. And actually, I must tell everybody that I am doing this kind of thing. Incidentally, I was at Temple for about 2 years, and I learned more than the students did teaching electronics and that kind of thing. But I am sure they learned a lot too. But then I got a job up at Hershey, or Lancaster for RCA, and I went down to RCA, and that was the beginning of a fabulous career. My first job was to develop all kinds of circuits and to life test tubes, and these were later used to television industry, and there's about 400 or 500 transmitters out there that had these circuits in. Later on, in 1969, that happened. But the important part about this, I want to bring a point about here, is this. RCA in Lancaster had more development facilities, better development facilities than any other place in the world. And I can say this with confidence because I was also the support engineer for all the patent people for RCA. So I had the chance to go over to Russia, I had a chance to go all over Europe, I had a chance to go to China, I had a chance to go, and I saw their factories. And I knew the Russian factories were so far behind us that they couldn't even compete anywhere on that kind of electronics at all. But anyway, then we also worked on very, very high power radar. Some of the highest power radar development test facilities was right there in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. We worked on 400 megacycles. I'll just tell you, there were 5 million watts of peak power out of these tubes and everything. And then we did that at 400 megawatts. Now those tests were made primarily to support that system all the way across Canada, remember? Where they put all those radars up there, and they were looking up at the sky, and what they wanted to do, the whole objective of that thing was to give the United States 30 minutes notice that an atomic bomb was on the way. That was the whole reason for it. And a lot of that research work was done right there in in our city, Lancaster. You just never saw it. It was very modern, had a very modern factory, great factory people. They knew what they were doing, and they worked their butts off to try to make sure that we had the best tubes in the world. The largest tube in the world was built there at 400 megacycle. It was 5 million watts, peak, 300 kilowatts hour power. You'll have to go into all the numbers on that thing. But the point I'm making about all of this is this. When, due to this experience that we had there, I was chosen then in 1960 to go over to Kwajalein, Warren and Moore. And the idea there was we were going to shoot radar beams up at missiles coming in at us. They shot the missiles at us from Point Mugu, California, 5,300 miles away. Now what happens when a missile goes up in the atmosphere like this and starts coming back in, when it comes in, everything burns up on it except the nose cone, which is ceramic. And theoretically, the hydrogen bomb, or the bomb, wasn't hydrogen, the atomic bomb would be in that nose cone. So I was sent over there to do that, and we did it right away. We were able to catch that nose cone coming in about 3 minutes before anybody else. All the major radars around, all the sophisticated were much better than our theoretically. Didn't catch it, but we caught it coming in. And the missiles come in, and then it was down in Kwajalein, there was another missile down there in a bunker way down in the ground, and it would come out of the ground and come up and shoot, go across the nose cone. If it went across the nose cone, that was a hit. And we did that for about 6 weeks, doing that like it. And actually, during that period of time, several interesting things happened. One time, well, let me tell you this. First of all, you could get up in the buildings there and look out. And I many times stood in my ladder right there because I could see all the instruments on my equipment down there. I knew that it was working okay. So I could stand up there and watch what's going on. You could look out there and you could see fishing boats. Now, fishing boats were almost sunk. You know, well, they weren't fishing boats. They're loaded with electronic equipment. They were also looking. Some of those were Russian ships. One time, they yelled, "Heads up, heads up!" And one of the missiles went astray. And I happened to be up there, and my boss got all excited because I didn't come down right away. But I saw the missile go out over not the missile, nose cone, go out over it, and went out over and landed on the lagoon down further. So there was a lot of interesting experience. Those missiles for that 6-week period all came from Point Mugu, California, which during our motorhome trips later we went down to see, and it was very interesting to go see those missile sites later to see what was going on. Another thing, after we came home, that 6-week test, we stopped in Washington again, and the company arranged to send my wife out there, my wife Ploma, and she came out, and we went to the World's Fair in 1960 when it opened up, and we ate up in the big tower up there, and took the rides on the train that they had, wiring trains that had and all that, and saw Washington at that point. So we had a great time during that. I went home for a while, and later on then they told us that we're going to send you back over again for 2 more weeks. And this time we went over, and of course when we went over, what you did is you flew to Hawaii, and you caught an Army airplane and went over to Kwajalein. And going over to Kwajalein, if you know your islands over there, you'll see Hawaii, Johnson Island, let's see, Kwajalein, and then the Marianas as you go over the ocean there. But anyway, they were going to make hydrogen bomb tests in the atmosphere over Johnson Island. And our job was to send radar beams up and see what beams would go through and what beams would be reflected back, so they had some good reflections of ideas of what was going on. And so we did that experiment. And actually, when the bomb went off, you could see these streamers going from Johnson Island coming out around the earth. You see these light rays going out through that. And that was an interesting experiment all that also. Then, of course, after that, RCA didn't realize what they had, and they decided they were going to spend a lot more money instead of on power grid, these high power support. Incidentally, the people who supported us was RADC up in Rome, New York, Rome Air Development Center. Did all the support for us. They supported our military division, and then supported us. That's how it all worked. But anyway, it was still a very, very fantastic experience. From there, when they decided they were going to do it, a guy offered me a job to go to IMAX, West Coast, 3 years in a row, and I decided the third year I was going to take it. I took it. They met me at NAB and signed up, and I took that. I went to IMAC in San Carlos, California, and that plant now is a big hospital there now, but it's no longer there. But anyway, we worked again on very high power transmitters, like accelerator amplifiers for accelerators around the world, and FM for FM transmitters, all kinds of transmitters and stuff like that. We were working on that for years and years and years. Then Varian, I should think, bought the Continental Division in Dallas, Texas, in 1985, and I was asked to go down there to run that place. I went down there, spent 3 years there, and then I got an offer to go back to Penn State to teach part-time, and I was wanted to do that. And finally a guy came along from corporate headquarters at Harris Electronics. He said, come and help me for a year. I didn't even go teach. I decided to go help. I found out there was a way that we could get all kinds of business that the people around the world were not familiar with. For example, we sold $30 million worth of stuff to China, and the Chinese were building it too. The own people wouldn't buy their own transmitters, for example, that kind of thing. Well, anyway, it was a fabulous experience on all of that. Let's see. Well, I don't want to go into all the details of the Harris deal, but suffice it to say it was a very successful. I was going to leave in a year, and I stayed 8.5 years. I liked it so much, and I was able to get along with them, and I stayed there 8.5 years. I worked until I was age 70, and all I can say is this, that all of it was based on the fact that I got interested in the Air Force and taking those tests when I was in high school, and had the opportunity to go and have a fabulous experience in the Air Force, and I did nothing but keep busy the whole time we were there, doing things which were very enjoyable. And so as a result of all that, I also went on to industry, and I also had about 50 years of things that I love to do and get paid well for. So what else can God do for you than do something like that? I had a beautiful life, all starting with my experience with the Air Force. All I can say, it was a pleasure talking to you guys.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sorry you had such a dull life. I know there's a few questions here. I'm sorry?
We have a short video that you might want to see.
All right, and then afterwards we'll take a couple of questions. I know your student has one, and there may be some others, and then we'll wrap it up.
Thank you. This is what, as I was telling you, we did a lot of the development of stuff all over our life. I kept those pictures. Here's the son right here. He spent 23 years for you got it up. Here I am in the jungles there in Cyclone. And let's see. And again, those are the tents we lived in because there was no barracks available at that point. And so, and here, interesting, in the town line, I heard this guy talking up there, and went up to see him, was Ralph Shank. Another guy in my high school class was there. That's Ralph Shank over there. And we had a great time talking all the time there. But he was not working in the field I was working, he was working in another part. This is the crew that I had down in the 55th Weather Reconnaissance, and they were part of the group work with me on, worked on the airplanes. We didn't dress very properly over there at that time. Again, this has to be the barracks because we had barracks down in Martin Field. And there's the LST, and the way up to from Guam up to Saipan. Of course, the bottom part of the cargo was used for cargo in this case, and then we rode the top on the way up there to the 317th bomber. And this is another one of those shots from up there in Saipan at this point. We had, and then here's our handmade marker. There's a B-29 rebuilt. That's the one that the colonel took over. And then, of course, there I am on the Lockheed Aircraft Factory again. After we finished that, that was a really good school. And of course, being able to be near Hollywood and Burbank and all that kind of thing, we had a great time. There was an instructor in that group there. It's a long time. There's that 1940 Chevrolet I bought. And believe it or not, that Chevrolet, after I used it for a while, Jonas Palmer's brother helped me to overhaul it. And I got to tell you first, I met that girl there, and she was my Chevrolet pal. And here's my other B-29 in the way. All I wanted to say was that girl that you saw there, she and I were married just recently, 66 years, and it all started with that old Chevrolet there.
All right, now I know we have a question from your student. Let me,
You were talking about the missiles being fired. I was wondering, we were watching from Point Magoo, which would go downrange into the Pacific. We had a big parabolic reflector in Washington, D.C., and we were looking at the ionosphere around that period, because we used to send teams around the world to record atmospheric events. Signatures, we call
As I told you, all our missiles went way up in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
And we saw them go, later on, they went over the area, and they landed in the ocean where we were. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah. Some of them, when we were doing, they were watching them coming out of Point Magoo.
Yeah, I saw a couple, I caught a couple. We caught on the radar. If there's any kinds of clouds or anything, you could, the snowstorm was small enough you didn't see it. But we could catch it on radar maybe 3 or 4 minutes before it came into the atmosphere. Like I told you. Yeah.
by the way, this is Armin Ackery. This is his first visit here with us. He says his badge says World War II veteran, U.S. Navy. So it seems to me that the military has gotten a little more techie in this forum than we've had before. So thank you very much for your question. Anybody else? I have a question. The B-29s, et cetera, that you were rebuilding in Guam and whatnot, were they coming back from combat? The B-29s that you were rebuilding in Guam, Saipan, were they coming back from combat? Were they shot up, or were they just worn out?
Well, some of them were shot up, and we had to put new pieces on them. We had to grow to do that. But most of them were because they had mechanical problems. Like the whole electrical system failed, or the engines didn't work. Like I told you, we had to put 4 new engines in another one. But the interesting part about after the war was over, like I told you, it was interesting, you could drive all over Saipan. You go in the warehouse, and there's only one or two guys there. You go in and look to find what you want yourself. You didn't sign for it, you just took it, went back and went to work. But that was, yes, there were, most of them weren't shot up airplanes, they were mechanical propellers.
Well, thank you so much, Tom. I'd like you to have one of our brand new issued cards. If you have other friends, World War II veterans, we'd love to have you bring them to us and even speak to us.
Okay, great.
And also, brand new first ever.
There we go.
I'd like you to have our World War II round table coffee cup.
Those of you that visit my garage will see 3 big pictures in there in the garage wall, 17, 24, and 29. Okay.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for coming. Come next month. Visit the Helmet Committee on your way out, please.